Imagine creating an institution that survives the Roman Empire, the Black Death, the rise and fall of kings, the discovery of the New World, the Industrial Revolution, 2 world wars, the Cold War, and the Internet. For nearly 2,000 years, governments collapsed, currencies disappeared, and entire civilizations vanished into history. Yet one institution remained: the Vatican. At first glance, that seems impossible. Vatican City is the smallest country on Earth. It covers less than half a square kilometer. No oil reserves, no factories, no major exports, no technology industry, no army capable of defending itself against modern nations. And yet, it became one of the most influential institutions in human history. Most people assume the answer is money. They picture hidden vaults filled with gold, priceless works of art, secret investments, ancient treasures accumulated over centuries. But that explanation misses the real story. Because the Vatican did not survive for 2,000 years because it was rich. In many ways, it became rich because it survived for 2,000 years. And that raises a much more interesting question. What allowed it to survive when so many empires failed? To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning. The early Christian church was not powerful. It was not wealthy. In fact, it was often persecuted. Its followers met in secret. Its leaders held little influence. And for centuries, Christianity existed on the margins of the Roman Empire. There were no grand cathedrals, no vast estates, no financial empire, only a growing belief system spreading across a fragmented world. Then, something extraordinary happened. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity. Suddenly, a movement that had once been hunted by the state became connected to the state itself. Land was donated. Churches were built. Political influence expanded. But the most important thing the church gained was not money. It was legitimacy. And legitimacy may be the most underrated asset in human history. But when millions of people voluntarily accept your authority, you possess a form of power that is far more durable. For rulers, legitimacy has always been one of the most valuable resources on Earth. Armies can conquer territory. Money can buy loyalty. But neither guarantees acceptance. Throughout history, kings constantly searched for ways to convince people that their authority was justified. The church offered exactly that. It could bless rulers, validate dynasties, support political authority, and in return, rulers often rewarded the institution that provided this legitimacy. This created a powerful cycle. Influence generated trust. Trust generated donations. Donations generated assets. Assets generated more influence. Over centuries, the church accumulated something far more durable than cash: property. Across Europe, wealthy families donated land. Nobles transferred estates. Kings granted privileges. Monasteries expanded. Cathedrals appeared. The church became one of the largest landowners in history. But ownership was merely the visible result. The invisible force behind it was trust, because people rarely give away valuable assets to institutions they do not trust. And trust is one of the few assets that can compound for centuries. Most forms of wealth eventually decline. Currencies lose value. Companies fail. Industries disappear. Technology becomes obsolete. Trust behaves differently. Once established, it often becomes self-reinforcing. The more people trust an institution, the more influence it gains. the more influence it gains, the more trust it attracts. For centuries, the Church sat at the center of European society. It educated populations, recorded history, provided social services, defined moral standards, and acted as a stabilizing force during periods of enormous uncertainty. This position gave it something far more powerful than money. It gave it permanence, and permanence creates opportunities unavailable to almost everyone else. Most businesses think in quarters. Governments think in election cycles. Empires often think in decades. The Church thought in centuries. That time horizon changed everything. When kingdoms collapsed, the Church remained. When currencies failed, the Church remained. When political systems changed, the Church remained. Every crisis that destroyed competitors often strengthened institutions that had already earned long-term trust. This is one reason why measuring the Vatican's wealth today is so difficult. People often ask, how much is the Vatican worth? The honest answer is that nobody really knows. How do you value St. Peter's Basilica? How do you price the Sistine Chapel? How do you assign a number to centuries of cultural influence? The Vatican owns extraordinary collections of art, historic properties, financial assets, investments, archives. Yet focusing on those assets can be misleading, because the Vatican's most important asset does not appear on a balance sheet. It never has. The true source of Vatican power cannot be stored in a vault. It cannot be auctioned, and it cannot be measured in dollars. It exists in the minds of people. More than 1 billion Catholics live around the world today. The Vatican maintains diplomatic relationships with countries across the globe. Its leaders regularly influence debates about politics, ethics, economics, and culture. That influence exists because people continue to assign value to its authority. And authority is ultimately a form of trust. This becomes even more interesting when we compare the Vatican to modern institutions. At first glance, organizations like Visa, BlackRock, or Cloudflare appear completely different. One processes payments. One manages trillions. One helps power the internet. But beneath the surface, they all follow a remarkably similar pattern. Their greatest asset is not what they own. It is the trust placed in the systems they operate. Visa works because people trust payments will go through. BlackRock manages trillions because investors trust the institution. Cloudflare protects websites because companies trust its infrastructure. The Vatican operates on the same principle. Not because it is a business, but because trust has always been one of the most valuable forms of capital ever created. And once an institution becomes deeply embedded into society, trust becomes incredibly difficult to replace. That may be the most important lesson in this entire story. Most people think wealth creates power. History often suggests the opposite. Power creates trust. Trust creates influence. Influence creates ownership. And ownership eventually creates wealth. The Vatican did not become powerful because it accumulated money. It accumulated money because it became trusted. And once you see that pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. The strongest institutions are rarely the ones with the most resources. They are the ones people continue to trust when uncertainty appears. In that sense, trust is not just a social concept. It is one of the most valuable assets ever created. For nearly 2,000 years, empires rose and fell around the Vatican. Kings disappeared. Dynasties collapsed. Corporations emerged and vanished. Entire economic systems transformed. Yet, the Vatican remained. Not because it possessed the most gold, not because it commanded the largest army, and not because it controlled the most land. It remained because, long before it accumulated wealth, it accumulated something far more valuable: trust. And history suggests that trust may be the most powerful asset ever created. If you enjoy documentaries that uncover the hidden systems behind power, money, and influence, subscribe to Nexplainr. And if you learned something new today, leave a like. It helps more people discover the stories they do not teach in school.